Today's stuff we're going to be learning is Bava Kamma Daf Mem Gimel. We're going to start at the bottom of Mem Bet and Mubet at the Tanu Rabbanan, about 10 or 12 lines from the bottom. And there's a study guide which will help organize today's daf. It's a bit of a complicated daf. So with that, we will get started. Okay, we're going to start Tanu Rabbanan. Behemit Isha Isha. So we have a problem in the Pasuk. The Pasukim start again by shor tam, and then it moves to shor muad. By shor tam, it says if a shor tam kills, Isha Isha. And then it says, and if he was muad and he was already forewarned and killed Isha o Isha, which seems unnecessary, to which Rabbi Akiva asked that question and says, V'chima, Amar Rabbi Akiva, V'chima ba'zel lelamdenu. What did this come to teach us? Im l'chayev ala isha ki'ish. If it's to say that you're liable for killing a woman, whether, just like a man, we already learned that in the previous verse. Okay, we don't even start asking the question, what would be the difference if you would kill a man or a woman? Okay, maybe we'll get to that later. I think it comes up in over the next stuff, possibly. Anyway, but basically, why would it bother saying it twice? So they answer, we learned something unique from this, which is killing a woman is like killing a man in a particular way. In what way? If you kill a man, now the man is no longer alive. So what will happen to the damages that you're going to pay, the kofer payment? It's going to go to the yorshim, right? To those who inherit, meaning the sons. If not the sons, if there's no sons, there's only daughters, then the daughters. If there's no daughters, it'll go to the brothers. Not the brothers, right? The father or I forget now the order, whether it's brothers or father. We'll get to all this in Bava Batra. But now it says, Af Ishan is a kahali yorsha. Same thing. And that's what happens here. This whole kofer payment is obviously being paid after death. The whole idea is the shor killed a person, and now you have to pay the kofer, the ransom payment, right? The owners really should die, but instead they pay this ransom payment and they pay it to the family. So the woman who gets killed, now normally what happens with a woman's property goes to her husband. So this is a unique halacha that instead of going to the husband, it's going to go, again, the same order to her sons, if not sons, daughters, etc. It's going to go to her heirs. So now they say, okay, that's a unique halacha. Now they say, Sever Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva learns this from here. Lo yared labal, but doesn't the husband inherit everything from the wife? And isn't it a Torah halacha? There's actually a debate about whether it's learned out by Torah law that the husband inherits the wife or by rabbinic law. In Judaism, okay, in Jewish inheritance law, the woman doesn't inherit the husband, right? Nowadays, everybody usually, the spouse will inherit either direction. But in halacha, now it goes to the men in the family. Now, but the woman's stuff, instead of going to her heirs, usually goes to her husband. And in fact, Rabbi Akiva himself learns this out from the Torah. There's a pasuk. I'm not going to get into the pasuk. We have a long daf, so a different time we'll get to this. It's very out of context where it's actually about the daughters of Tzlafchan inheriting. And there's these extra words, Yerashotan. They learn from there that this is those who say it's Torah law, that the husband inherits the wife. So Rabbi Akiva himself says a husband inherits his wife. So how could it be that they wouldn't get this payment? That the husband wouldn't get the payment of the kofer, should inherit everything of hers? Well, we're going to answer Amar Rich Lakish. Lo Amar Ela B'kofer. Specifically by kofer, it goes to her heirs. Why is that? First, I want to explain this line, what ra'oi is, what muhzak is, and then we'll read the whole sentence. Ra'oi, there's a difference between property that, I'll put it in modern terms, that's in the woman's bank account right now, okay, that she owns at the time of death, and property or money that's coming to her after death. Ra'oi is something that's going to come to her after her death. Muhzak is something she's holding in her lifetime. So the husband inherits everything the wife has in her lifetime, right? When she dies, it's hers. But he doesn't inherit what's coming to her after death. Now, kofer payment, let's go back to the beginning of the line. Rish Lakish says, specifically by kofer, because kofer, it's only paid after the woman dies. And therefore, it's ra'oi. It's in the category of ra'oi. And the husband only inherits things that are muhzak. Okay, there's another place where we see this distinction in Bechor getting double portion. Bechor gets double portion of all the father's property, but only the father's property that's in his possession, not property that comes into the father's estate after the death. It's the same thing. So we're going to say that the woman, the husband inherits the woman only in muhzak, only in things that were in her possession. Kofer is something that comes to her after death, and therefore he doesn't get it. So that explains it very simply. However, my time, how do we know this? That it comes after death. It's pretty obvious, but they should prove from the pasuk. Amar kra, if you kill a man or a woman, the shor kills a man or a woman. Hashor yisakel, the shor will be stoned. V'gam ba'alav yumat, and the owner should also die. But im kofer yushat alav, and therefore, right, the ransom payment comes, and it's obvious after the death, and therefore it's clear. But we have a question. B'nizakin lo amar Rabbi Akiva. But wait, when it comes to damages that go now, what would be damages to a woman after death? It would be that the shor damages a woman, let's say, and then, or a person damages a woman, it doesn't matter. They haven't yet paid, and the woman dies. Okay. Now, at this point, how do we view that according to what we just said? Right. So now we're going to say it sounds like that's different because that is muhzak, because she was already supposed to get paid in her lifetime. The whole thing of the kofer is, since it's supposed to be paid after her death, therefore it goes to her heirs. If it's supposed to go to her during her lifetime, then you would say that's muhzak, even though she hasn't gotten it yet, but it was supposed to go to her in her lifetime. So according to this, you would assume that Rabbi Akiva would say that goes to her husband. But we have a braita that says, Hatanya, here's a case of a person damages a woman, and she also loses she was pregnant, she loses the baby. Saw this case just before. Now, the baby part isn't really relevant to us, although we will go a little bit into it. But notei nezek v'tzar leisha, she gets the payments of the nezek and the tsar, of the damages and the pain. Demei vladot labal, the fetus goes, we haven't yet talked about her dying, don't worry. The fetus, the money for the fetus goes to the embryo, the lost child, goes to the husband. Ein habal, what if the husband's no longer alive? Let's say the husband dies in the meantime. No ten liyorshav, obviously his heirs get it. Ein haisha, well, the payments that were supposed to go to the woman, the damage payments go straight to her, not to the husband. If she dies before she gets them, no tenet liyorshav. Now that's not what we were supposed to fill in according to what we learned. According to what we learned, it was supposed to go to the husband because it was supposed to come to her during her lifetime. That's called muhzak. Now, it's not exactly, and we'll get back to that because she didn't actually get it yet in her lifetime, but we'll get back to that soon. But right now, they're going to assume it sounds like, from what we learned, it should go to the husband. So, and by the way, we're going to finish this. Okay, another case not relevant to our purposes. If she was a shipcha who was already released from being a maidservant and was Jewish, or a convert, right? Both of them have no heirs. So if they're to die, zacha, whoever damaged her actually wins out because they have no one to pay because there's no heirs. That's a side point. So how do we deal with this? So Amar Rabba bigrusha, v'chein Amar Rav Nachman bigrusha. Pay attention who says this. Both Rabba and Rav Nachman explain this in a case of a woman who is divorced, and that's why the husband doesn't inherit. If she was still married, of course the husband would get it, and that resolves our problem. It's only because she's not married. Well, we're going to have a few questions against this, though. Number one, so first, right, Amre, they say, wait, but grusha nami tiflug b'dmei vladot. If she's really divorced, then I told you we get back to the baby. If she miscarries, then she should split 50-50 the vladot. In other words, why did the husband get the vladot? We assume the husband got the money because when they're married, usually the money goes to the husband. But, right, so her damage money actually went to her. That was a unique halacha here. But the Demei Vladot, fine, it goes to the husband. But if they're divorced, the Vladot should be split 50-50, right? Whatever loss there was a loss for each of them independently because she's divorced and she's her own independent person. So, I mean, obviously she's her own independent person otherwise, but financially she's independent. So she should have gotten 50-50. So Amar Papa, don't ask me that question. This is a unique thing because there's a unique halacha here, unique what we call gzerat hakatuv. It's clear from the Torah that the husband gets the money for the vladot no matter what, even if they were never married and they had a child outside of marriage. That's what it means by snut here. Even if they were never even married, how do we get this? My time, Amar Kra, Kasher Yashit Alav Baal Haisha. It says, right, the payment that goes to the woman, that goes to the man for the vladot, for the loss of the baby, is kasher shit alav Baal Haisha, the husband of the woman. Now, Baal literally is translated, comes from the word be'ilah, from the word of having relations, meaning whoever had relations with the woman gets the money for the fetus, meaning it doesn't ever go to the woman for a particular reason that has nothing to do with, even if they're divorced, even if they were never married to begin with, that's not a question. So we started with, let's just review so we keep everything in order. Isha Isha comes to teach you that the woman is like the man in the sense that the kofer payment goes, right, when she gets killed by this shor and the owner pays the kofer, goes to her heirs, not to the husband, which sounds like it's a unique halacha by kofer, not anywhere else. But when it comes to damages, it seems to say also it goes to her and her heirs, even if she should have gotten it in her lifetime, which seems to go against what we just said. But we explained, no, that's only in the case where she's divorced. If she's not divorced, it actually does go to her husband. And with that, we resolved. And now the Gemara said, and then we had a side question. The rest of the source doesn't make sense if she was divorced, but no, it does, because that's a special unique halacha about the husband getting the Dmei Vladot. Now they have a separate question, which is based on a different sugya. Maybe I'll teach you the sugya first so we understand it, and then we'll go back and read it inside. We talked about this ra'oi muhzak. Now there's a debate. So if we go with a range, okay, what's ra'oi, what's muhzak? Okay, muhzak means she had it at the time of death. So that would be, and we said it applies for the bechor pishnayim of whatever his father had at the time of death is muhzak, and he gets the double portion. Anything that comes later is ra'oi, and he doesn't get pishnayim, and the woman, right, if it's a woman, it wouldn't go to her husband, it would go to her heirs. So we had a case of kofer, which gets paid after. That's clearly ra'oi, something coming later. We had money in the bank, is clearly muhzak. What if you're owed money by somebody? Where does that come? I loaned money, and then before I collected it, I died. So Rabbi and Rav Nachman have a debate, and they each say the opposite. Rabbi says if you collect, and here's the chart on the sheet, I'm sharing the screen for those watching, Gavu, for those not, you can open the chart and see it. Gavu karka, if they took land, okay, for the loan, if they got paid for the loan in land, then, okay, now the question here that Rabbi and Rav Nachman are discussing in Bava Batra is heirs and for pishnayim, for double portion. Does the bechor get pishnayim if the father, let's say, lent out 100 shekel, got paid back in land after he died? Would he get double portion? So Rabbi says, yes, he would, because land is considered muhzak. Why is land muhzak? Well, this we've discussed many times. When I loan money, right, your land is guaranteed for the loan. So it's as if the land is already mine. And therefore, it's muhzak. It's as if it was in my possession before I died. And therefore, firstborn will get double portion. But if I get money back, now money, what happened? I gave you 100 shekel. You spent that 100 shekel and gave me back a different 100 shekel. That's something that comes to me after death because it wasn't mine, right? It's not like the 100 shekel in your property had my name written on it, not at all, right? So therefore, when I get it later, it's ra'oi, and the bechor would not get double portion. Rav Nachman says the exact opposite. Okay, so if you didn't like the logic, he says the opposite. Karka, right? I give you 100 shekel, you pay me back land. That's two totally different things. The land wasn't mine at all. The land was something else entirely. That's as if it's something new, and then the bechor wouldn't get double portion. Money, I gave you 100 shekel. You gave me back 100 shekel. You gave it to my heirs. So that's basically returning what was already mine. So therefore, it's as if it was mine before. Okay, so they each say total opposite things. But the point is that Rabbi and Rav Nachman, the same two people who answered this source and said begrusha, okay, we're going to now say Benukma l'Rabba kigon shegavu ma'ot, u'leRav Nachman kigon shegavu karka. Why didn't you say the reason why the husband doesn't get it is not because she was divorced, but because according to Rabbah, they collected it with money, and it would be a case where the damages were collected with money, and then the money is, it was supposed to be given, right? That's something that wasn't in her possession at all. There was no lien, there was no nothing, and the money came later. That's right way. And according to Rav Nachman, you would say it's in the case of gavu karka, where it was ra'oi. In other words, and then we would say that's why the husband didn't get it. That was almost a better answer than saying she was divorced. Why don't we just say the damages don't go to the husband in that case? Because according to Rav Nachman, they paid it in land, which according to Rav Nachman, land had nothing to do with the damages she was owed. It's just, damages she was owed was in money. You paid in land. Or according to Rabbah, it was money. And money is, wasn't liened at all, and therefore it wasn't as if it was hers. So they want to know why. Right, they basically ask, why didn't we give that answer? Why did Rabbi and Rav Nachman, right, the same two people who have this argument somewhere else about A different issue, could have applied it here in the same way. There, they were talking about the bechor and pishnayim, about the double portion, but it's the same issue here because it's all what's ra'oi, what's muhzak, and then we could have had a better explanation of the Braita. To which they answer, an interesting answer, Amrei, which you have to know another whole sugya to know this. Amrei hanemila libnei ma'arava aliba de Rabbanan, hika amrei hacha hirebi. The sugya there was according to the rabbi's opinion in a different machloket. And the sugya here was according to the Rebbe in that machloket there. Okay. Without understanding that whole machloket, we don't really know what they're talking about. So I brought it on the sheet. In Bava Batra, Daf Kuf Kaf Daled, there's a machloket about shevach sheshavchu nechasim lachar mitat avihem, which means if the properties went up in value after the death of the father, okay, so we're all brothers, we're supposed to inherit, and then the property goes up in value. So again, does the firstborn get double portion of the increase? Okay, let's say it went up by 100 shekels. So if you get double portion, let's say there's 3 brothers. So do we split it 33, 33, 33? Or do we split it, 33.3? Or do we split it 50% to the oldest, because he gets double portion, and 25% each to the younger brothers? So that's a big question. Well, the rabbis say, the bechor does not get pishnayim because any increase in value of the property that happened after the father's death is after the father's death. And that, on that basis, they have a machloket in Bava Batra, which is then they start arguing within that, gavu karka, gavu ma'ot, okay, then they have this machloket. But Rebbe says the bechor gets pishnayim of that because that's muhzak. And then if you hold that that's muhzak, because it's as if it's something that the father's property went up in value, then you would say about our damages, the damages that are owed to the woman were already owed to the woman from before. So that's muhzak. And therefore, it was obvious to Rabbi and Rav Nachman when they read our sugya, they were reading it according to Rebbe. Okay, I just want to read the words here again. Hanimile, the sugya there, when they're having that machloket, is according to B'nei Ma'arava Liba de Rabbanan. It's according to the rabbis in Israel that were arguing about the rabbi's opinion, the Chachamim's opinion. And then within that, they started arguing, is a difference between karka and ma'od and all that. But in our sugya, they hold like Rebbe. And then they can say something within an opinion. So there, they had this machloket within the rabbi's opinion. But here, they're holding like Rebbe, who says that in the shevach, and the increase in value, is all viewed as muhzak, as if it was theirs, the father's to begin with. And therefore, also here they would say the damage the woman's supposed to get is hers to begin with, which means that the only way to understand that Braita would be to say that it must be she's divorced, because otherwise it really should go to the husband. So that's just an aside as to why they chose that answer and not a different answer. And the Gemara suggested maybe that sugya was according to the rabbis and this sugya is according to Rebbe. We don't really know for sure, but that's what they're saying. Okay, that's the end of this sugya. Now we're going to start a whole nother sugya. We're going to have 2 parallel halachot, which seem like they're kind of saying one and the same thing about different things. Only at the end of the sugya, we're going to see that there's really actually 3 opinions here, and these 2 don't fully agree, and there's going to be a 3rd opinion. That's going to come up much later. Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. The main topic we're going to discuss here is if a shor kills a person or kills a slave without intent, what are the consequences? What do they have to pay? So Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, which is Rish Lakish, says, shor shehemita te'eved shelo b'chavana. If a shor kills a slave without intent, remember, if they do it with intent, they pay 30 shekels and the shor gets killed. As soon as the shor does it without intent, they weren't trying to damage or kill, there's actually no death penalty for the shor. The shor doesn't get killed. So comes Rish Lakish and says, patur mishlashim shekalim. If the shor doesn't get killed, then you're also going to be exempt from the knas payment, that penalty of 30 shekels that you pay for a slave. Shenema, because it says in the pasuk, kesef shlashim shekalim yitain ladona v'ashor yisakel. Those 2 things are juxtaposed. You pay 30 shekel and the shor gets stoned. Kozman shashor b'skila habalim mishamim shlashim shekalim. So those 2 things work together. If the shor gets stoned, then you pay 30 shekels. But if, for example, there was no intent of the animal to damage or to kill, and you don't get ein hashor b'skila, the shor doesn't get stoned, ein habalim mishamim shlashim shekalim. So that shlashim shekalim is out. Amar Rabba similarly says, shor she'emit ben chorin shelo b'chavana patur kofer. What about the case before that in the Pesukim, right? We had the Eved, a shor kills a slave, it's 30 shekels. If a shor kills a person, it's kofer. Well, comes Rabbanit says, if you killed a ben cholin, that's just a regular Jewish person, not who's a slave, shelo b'chavana, without intent, patur mi kofer, you're exempt from the kofer payment for the exact same reason. Shenema, ashur yisakel v'gam ba'alav yumab, because it says again, the shor gets stoned and the owner is supposed to die. Im kofer yushat alav, but if he pays his way out, then he can pay his way out. So kol zman shashor b'skila ba'alim mishamim kofer. So again, if the shor gets stoned, which is if it was done with intent, then ba'alim mishamim kofer, then they pay the kofer payment. Ein hashor b'skila, ein ba'alim mishamim kofer. Okay, so that's Rish Lakish says it about the Eved. Rabba says it about a regular person getting killed, right? When there's no skila, which means in a case where there's no intent, then there's no, according to Rish Lakish, no payment for the Eved, no 30 shekel payment, and according to Rabba, no kofer payment for the no kofer payment for the owner of the shor who kills a person. Now, Eitiv Abai. Abai comes and questions Rabba, the second halacha about the shor who kills a ben cholin. Hey, meet shul. Okay, this is a Mishnah in Ketubot, and I'm going to show you also, it's charted out here, which is important to see. Okay, so now at the bottom of the first side of the study guide, we have the beginning part of this Mishnah. Okay, actually, it's a little earlier on, just before the chart. Abai comes and quotes this Mishnah in Ketubot. Hey, meet shoriat ploni, o shorosha ploni. This is all sorts of cases where people admit, if you remember, because in Ketubot, it was admitting to rape. And rape, you pay knas. So if you admit to it, right, you're exempt from there's always a principle, you're exempt from a payment that you admit to in court if it's a knas, not if it's mammon, right? Not if it's a financial compensation, only if it's a penalty, you'll be exempt. So if you come and admit, my shor killed someone, or shorosha ploni, or killed the shor of someone, since that payment is a compensation payment, you're going to pay, okay? Now, what's the compensation payment here? We're assuming my lav kofer, is it not? What payment do you pay when the shor kills a person? It's kofer, right? So if it's kofer, what do you see here? If you come and admit that it paid, right? Now, if you come and admit my shor killed someone, there's no witnesses. They will not kill the shor based on your testimony. The only thing you can do based on your own testimony is get yourself to pay something. But we just said, according to Rabbah, if you don't pay, the shor isn't stoned, then you don't pay kofer. This seems to say you do pay kofer. Okay, so how could you pay kofer according to Rabbah? Right, he just said when the shor doesn't get stoned, you don't pay kofer. Now they were talking about a shelo b'chavana case. This is different, but it shouldn't really be different. It seems like one and the same. This is just me coming forward and admitting that my shor killed someone. I would have to pay the kofer. To which the Gemara says and introduces a whole new concept, which is requires again more in-depth thinking than we could do in a daf yomi shiur. But the Gemara answers lo damim. This Mishnah is not talking about the kofer payment. The kofer payment is integrally connected with the shor getting stoned, as Rabbah said. This is Rabbah's answer. As I said, I stick with what I said, but let's imagine the scene. My shor kills a person. There's no witnesses. I come and admit it in court. So the shor doesn't get killed. I don't pay kofer, but I have to pay damim. What is damim? Damim is I have to pay the financial loss I caused the family. Okay, because in the end, if I came to court and admitted I caused damage to someone, I'd have to pay because that's financial compensation. Now, kofer is something else. Kofer is this payment of I need to atone for my sin that my shor killed. But if the event that I don't have that, well, at least we make me compensate the family financially for their loss, and I'd have to pay the value of that person to the family. Now, some of the commentators say, well, if you say that, remember, kofer, there was a machloket. Is it demei nizak or demei mazik? Is it based on the value of the person I killed, or is it based on my own value? If you say it's based on my own value, there's a clear difference here between kofer and damim. If you say it's based on the value of the person my shor killed, what's the difference whether we call it damim or we call it kofer? There's a whole big question there, and there's all sorts of nafkaminas. We're not going to get to go there today. But just understand that there's a new concept they're introducing here, that there could be financial compensation I'll have to pay, and that's what that source is talking about, that Mishnah in Ketubot. However, it's going to be a little bit tricky because comes the continuation of the question, and Abai continues and says, but damim, if you're going to say that Mishnah is talking about damim and financial compensation and not some sort of kofer payment that obviously you're not going to pay, well, ema seifa, the seifa doesn't make any sense. Hey, meet shori et avdosha ploni. What if my shor, I come forward and I admit my shor killed the slave of somebody? I don't pay based on my own admission Now, idamim amai lo. Now, if it's knas, we understand. Modeh b'knas patur. That's in general. The knas, the payment for the eved, right, is different from the kofer. Kofer payment is for atonement purposes. That you're going to pay anyway, even if you admit. But we said it's not talking about kofer. We said it's talking about damim here because you're not going to pay because the shor wasn't stoned. That's a separate reason. But the 30 shekalim you don't pay when you come and admit because you don't pay any penalty when you come forward with your own admission and there's no witnesses. But here, it can't be knas because if we just said the reshas, damim, the first part is not the kofer, and we assume right now that and it makes sense also from what we saw from Rish Lakish, what we saw from Rabbah, we make a parallel between the kofer for someone who kills a person and the knas for someone who kills a slave. So if we're going to say the resha is damim and not kofer, then the seifa can't be knas. Now, if it's not knas and it's damim, and we say basically if you come forward and admit your shor killed a slave, then if there's compensation in the case where there's no kofer, there should be compensation in the case where there's no knas. And you should have to pay the compensation to the family, in this case, the owner of the slave, for the financial loss you caused. So it doesn't make sense that the Mishnah says, Eino Mishalem al pi atzmo. So comes Rabbi and he says the following, and here we're on the first kerut. He says like this, I could theoretically tell you that just explain the Mishnah. The first case when it talks about killing a person is a free person is talking about the damim payment. Okay, this new damim payment we talked about, and that's why you pay it from admitting it, because you still owe financial compensation to the family, even though you're not going to pay the kofer. But when it says about killing the slave, it meant the knas payment. They were referring to the 30 shekels, and that you don't pay because it's modeh b'knas patur. If you come and admit about it, knas, you're exempt. But I'm not going to give you that answer because I know it's a bad answer. We don't give bad answers, okay? I'll find you a better answer because to say that one is damim and one is knas doesn't make sense because they seem to be very parallel. And if they're parallel, they should either be kofer and knas or damim and damim, okay? It doesn't make sense to say this. So therefore, I'm going to give you a different answer. With this, we're going to turn to Talmud bet. Idi damim. Both are talking actually about damim. And now we're going to have a little, okay, I couldn't even fit this into the chart. I did a second chart to explain. Now we're going to do a comparison between someone who kills a free person and someone who kills a slave in two different scenarios. And then we're going to say that they're both talking about damim in the second part of this chart. Okay, the second case they're going to talk about here. And in one you're going to pay and one you're not going to pay. So let's read. Miu ben chorin to mishalem kofer al pi atzmo. Okay, ben chorin, you would pay the kofer on its own, meaning that's if I come and admit. What does this mean? Vehechidami, in what case? We don't yet know what that means. De atu sade vashidu be dekata velo yade itam havi umoad havi. We're going to bring two scenarios. The first is there's witnesses that showed that the shor killed another person, okay, or the shor killed a slave. In this case, we're talking about the free person. There's witnesses that saw the shor kill a person. They testified that he killed. However, lo yade, they didn't know. What didn't they know? It's obvious they might not know this. Itam muad havi. So they come to court. They say Ruth's ox killed Naomi. Okay, now, but we don't know, was Ruth's ox shor tam or shor muad? Now, if we don't know what happens, well, we can't make you pay kofer. Remember, that's the difference between shor tam and shor muad. Shor tam doesn't pay kofer. The shor gets stoned, but you don't pay kofer. So, but Amar Mare de Muadhu. But Ruth came and she was a very honest person. And she said, my shor actually was a shor muad. So I have to pay. Well, in that case, Mishalin kofer al pi atzmo, because kofer isn't knas. Kofer is my own personal atonement. So if I come and admit in court, Ruth comes and admits and says it was my shor, and that's not, we knew it was her shor, but said my shor was a shor muad, then she can pay then she pays it. She actually is obligated to pay. But hecha deleka edim mishalem dami. If there's no witnesses at all, and Ruth just comes forward and says, my shor killed Naomi, and it was muad, okay, but that's not really the relevant thing. My shor killed Naomi, then there's no witnesses. Now, in that case, what's going to happen? We already learned this. The shor doesn't get stoned because based on Ruth's own testimony, we don't kill the shor. Therefore, she doesn't pay kofer. That's according to Rabbah. That's what we're trying to explain. But she would have to compensate the family because there's a financial loss to Naomi's family. So she would have to pay. But gabe eved she'eno mishalem knas al pi atzmo. but an Eved wouldn't pay. Okay, so we're comparing. The Ben Chorin would pay kofer on its own, but the Eved wouldn't pay knas by itself, because remember, kofer and knas are parallel. So let's do the parallel case, and this is why it's all charted out here to make it visual. So again, the case is, Adim say the shor killed, Ruth's shor killed Naomi's Canaanite slave. But we don't know if it's shor muad or shor tam. What did we say? The 30 shekel payment is only for a shor muad, not for a shor tam. Va'amar mare muadhu. But Ruth came forward and admitted it was a shor muad, which means she would have to pay the knas, but she doesn't pay the knas, because we only know she owes knas because of her admission. And modeh b'knas patur. Anyone who comes and admits they owe a penalty, they're exempt from the penalty. Because again, it's not financial compensation for the other side. And therefore, if you come and admit it, you don't have to pay. Lo mishtalem knas al pi atzmo. We don't pay knas by your own admission. And therefore, and this is, again, something the commentaries a little bit have questions with, but we don't have time to deal with it, how they get to this jump. But now they're going to say, if you don't pay the knas al pi atzmo, then in the case where there's no witnesses at all, and Ruth just came forward and told us the entire story, the shor killed, and there was, and it was a shor muad, she doesn't even pay the financial compensation for the family in a case where she comes and admits when there's no witnesses at all. So here comes the big difference, and this is how we understand the Mishnah in Ketubot. Hemit shariat ploni, osha ploni, you're mishalem al pi atzmo, but hemit shariat avdo eino mishalem al pi atzmo. Both are talking about damim payments, and in what case are they discussing? A case where there's no witnesses at all, and it's only the person's admission. And the issue that we're discussing about paying or not on their own is the damim and not the knas. Okay, and that's how Rabba will explain this Mishnah. Now, how you get from the fact that lo mishalem damim, again, is a bit of a question. They're somehow saying that since we don't have any damim payment in the Torah, we're only going to be, if you look at the chart, you kind of see it. Whether or not you pay damim is going to be based on the original law that is in the Torah. If you would pay the kofer, then you would pay the damim. That's the ben chorin. If you wouldn't pay the knas, in the Eved case, then you wouldn't pay the damim. That's this assumption that this sugya is doing. Okay, take it or leave it, because again, there are some problems with it, but we'll just assume that that's a given. So that's how Rabbi explains this Mishnah, which was brought as a question against his opinion. Again, I'll just review. Rabbi had said a shor who kills a ben chorin without intent is exempt from kofer, because anytime there's no stoning, there's no kofer. To which Abaye said, what about this case where you won't get, right, where in the Mishnah in Ketubot, where you come and admit the shor doesn't get stoned and you have to pay anyway? To which he said that's damim. Then we have this whole thing, how could it be damim? What about the seifa? Both are talking about damim, and we just explained how it could be. But now we're going to have another question on this, which is, Mativ Rav Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak. It says in a Braita, if you're going to distinguish here about the damim, okay, we're basically asking about this answer that we just gave, that if there's no witnesses and just the owner's admission, if it was to kill that the shor killed a ben chorin, a regular free Jew, you'd have to pay this financial compensation. If it was that they killed a slave, you wouldn't have to pay. But he says there's a Braita that says kol shechayav ben chorin chayav be'eved bein bekofer bein b'mita. Anytime you're chayav in a free person, in the similar parallel case, you'd be chayav for a slave, whether it's kofer, whether it's death. Now, kofer be'eved mi'ika, there is no kofer in a slave. So what could they possibly mean? What would be the same in both? Elalav damim. It must be, we're talking about damim here. Even though it says kofer, they're assuming anytime a ben chorin is chayav in damim, in this financial compensation, the eved would be, which would basically mean this chart is wrong. Ben chorin would have to pay damim. Well, then the eved would also, someone who killed a slave would also have to pay damim. That's how Rav Shmuel bar Yitzchak understands that Braita, which then goes against the answer we just gave. To which they're going to say, no. That was about a different case. The case we talked about here was a case where there were no witnesses, just the owner's admission that some death occurred by his shor, his ox. But now we're going to have to explain it some other way, and there's a debate about who exactly answered the question. Some people said that Rav Shmuel bar Yitzchak, who raised the question, he answered it himself. Some people say that Rabba answered it. Okay, he was the one who they questioned. He answered it himself. Either which way, here's the answer. Hachi katani. This is how to read the Braita. Kol shechayav beben chorim bechavana al pi edim. Okay, now go back to, right, a case where you'd be liable for the kofer. We're going to go back and explain it like kofer, which is if you're chayav beben chorin, in what case would that be? With intent. Okay, the shor killed with intent to kill, and with witnesses. Kofer, there's kofer payment. In the parallel case, chayav be'eved knas. This is what we said before. This is our analogy. Kofer is like knas. Kofer by Ben Chorin is like an analogy. A free person, kofer, is the same for a slave with knas. Now, here's where we're going to get to explaining that the Braita is talking about damim here. In a case where yochayev in a ben chorin shelo b'chavana al pi edim damim, let's say, not like we said before, there's no witnesses and it's all my own admission. That's a whole, or Ruth admitted it. That's not what we're talking about here. This Braita is talking about a different case, and then it doesn't contradict what we had the way we explained the case in the Mishnah Ketubot. The Mishnah Ketubot was all about admissions. There were no witnesses. The Braita, the Rav Shmuel Bar Yitzchak brought to contradict, where it says it's the same halacha across the board, is talking about when there are witnesses, but we're missing intent, which was the case we started with in the first place. Chayav be'eved shelo b'chavana al pi edim damim. So just like if a shor kills a free person and can't pay the kofer because it wasn't done with intent, and if there's no intent, remember, the shor doesn't get killed, and then there's no kofer. But you have to financially compensate the family. In that parallel case by an eved, where there was no intent to kill, so you don't get stoned, the shor doesn't get stoned, the owner doesn't have to pay the knas, but there also is damim payment. So we found a way to explain that Braita, which doesn't contradict the way we explained the Mishnah Ketubot, because the Mishnah Ketubot was there were no witnesses. So we're comparing apples and oranges. Those are two totally different things. So we still have our explanation of the Mishnah Ketubot, which they brought as a question on Rabbah. That was talking about something else. And we still have Rabbah, who basically says, in a case where there's no intent, you're not going to pay kofer, you're not going to pay knas. Now, we have established, though, you are going to have to financially compensate the family, though. So, by the way, in Eved, it's very clear what the difference is between knas and damim. In the Ben Chorin, it was tricky, especially if you say kofer is damei nizak, the value of the person you damaged, then damim and kofer really end up kind of one and the same. If you say it's damei mazik, then it's two totally different things. My kofer is me redeeming myself, Ruth having to pay her own value, versus damim would be pay the value of Naomi, assuming Ruth and Naomi have different values. And again, value is all determined by the value of a slave in the shuk, what a slave is sold for in the marketplace and how strong each person is. Now, Eved, there's a big difference. Knas is 30 shekels no matter what. Damim is the value of that slave in the market. So remember, we had the whole thing. It could be worth a sela and you still have to pay 30 shekels. It could be worth 100 and you only have to pay 30 shekels. If you're paying damim, in a case where there was no intent, and you don't pay the knas, then you pay damim, and then you just pay their value. So now we're going to still have more questions. Amalei Rav, if the whole thing we established right now is without intent, there's a damim payment, which is how we resolve these problems. Well, he says, well, just like a shor without intent kills a person, you have to pay damim. Then it would seem like if it was eish shelo b'chavana, I killed a person with fire, I would also have to pay damim. Okay, in other words, I won't have to, now, there is no kofer by fire. This is why it's a little bit tricky. I won't have to pay kofer, but I will have to pay the value of the damage I caused. Now, it seems like, and we're going to change this a little later, but it seems like Rava thinks that it's obvious you don't pay damim if you didn't intend your fire to kill someone. Okay, you made a fire, you didn't intend, and you killed a person, you didn't intend to kill a person, you don't have to pay damim. But he seems to say, why wouldn't you? It sounds like you would have to, because why should Eish be any different than shor? So first they want to try to figure out, which they're actually not going to succeed, why is it so obvious to Rava that in the case of Eish, you wouldn't pay? They're going to try two suggestions. If you're going to say from a Mishnah, they're going to quote two Mishnahs we already learned. If we had a case where you lit a fire to a haystack, and there was a gedi that was tied to it, and there was an eved that was next to it, but not tied, and nisrafimo, and they were burned with it, you'd be liable. But, and here's the part that's important to us, eved kafutlo, gdi samuchlo, if the eved was tied and couldn't move, and you burnt this haystack with the eved right next to you, ugdi samuchlo, and the gdi was right next, but not tied down, and right, the goat, and nisrafimo, and they were burned with it, patur, you'd be exempt. Now, right now, the Gemara assumes, what are you exempt from? You're liable for the burning of the gadish, because that you intended, and the two things you didn't intend, the slave and the gadi, you actually wouldn't have to pay for. So here you see, you didn't intend to kill them, and yet you don't have to pay. So why? If we just said a shor, you'd have to pay damim. So why wouldn't you have to pay the value of the person for, right, of the eved in this case? But They say, wait a minute, don't you remember how we learned that sugya? Ha'amar Rish Lakish, didn't Rish Lakish say, what's the halacha there? Kigon shehitzip begufo shel eved. You actually burn not the haystack, you burn the eved with intent to burn the slave. And what are you patur from? You're not patur from the eved. You're patur from paying the damages you caused to the animal and to the haystack. For a totally different reason, because you killed a person. When you kill a person, you're liable to the death penalty. If you're liable to the death penalty, then you're going to, right? You're going to be exempt from payment. So that doesn't teach you anything about fire without intent. You're exempt. So that's a different reason, because of this kimle, you're going to always have the higher punishment. The ella, option 2, maybe you learn it from here. Chomer be'esh mi b'shor. There's a chomer about fire that isn't by, chomer be'esh mi b'bor, that isn't by bor, which is sha'esh mu'edet lechol bein davar oila, bein davar she'em oila. Right? The fire is known to damage even things that it's not typically going to damage. Masha'en came b'bor, which is not true for bor. And without getting into the reviewing the details there, but what doesn't it say there? If this was an issue, that fire without intent, you'd actually be liable to pay the damim, the financial compensation, and you're not in bor because there's no such thing in bor. Well, ilu shaha'esh mishalemet shelo b'chavana damim masha'en kein b'bor lo katani. It doesn't list that as a difference. So if it doesn't list it as a difference, it must be it's not true. Well, that's not a good convincing answer, because Dilma was ton of a shear. Maybe they just left it out and they mentioned this one, they didn't mention that. Okay, so we don't know why it's so clear to Rav. And in fact, the Gemara is going to say it's actually not so clear to Rav. Rava was actually really asking a question, and he was saying the following. Okay, and I'll say it outside first, and then we'll see it inside, which is, we just established in the previous sugya that shor who kills shelo b'chavana, even though you don't pay kofer or knas, right, you're going to pay damages that you caused, damim. Now his question is, are we to say the same thing for Eish? Not that, how could you possibly say that? Because then Eish would be also the case, and it's not. No, that's not true. We're going to redo what we think Rava said. If you kill someone by a fire without intent, right, you've tried to burn this haystack and you killed a person, would you be liable for killing? Would you have to pay the damim, the financial compensation, for the fact that you killed this person without intent? Mi amrina. Now here goes our two possibilities. Do we say well, sure, we have two models. With intent, there's kofer. Without intent, you pay damim. Kind of to replace the kofer. When you can't pay kofer, we'll make you pay damim. Aval eish, kofer, but there is no kofer payment. There's no ransom payment. You should have died and therefore pay a ransom, pay this payment, this kofer payment. There is no such thing by eish. So damim. Maybe damim is only to replace all the cases where there is no kofer. Now, in this case, there's no kofer ever. So maybe there's no damim. Oh, Dilma. Or do we say the opposite, which is in shor, when there's no kofer, you don't pay damim. So since Eish, there's never kofer, maybe you always pay damim. Okay, it's basically taking the same thing and flipping it on its head, logically. And he asked the question, below Yadina, he didn't know which way to go. And then the answer is Teku. We don't actually know the answer to his question. So we basically, instead of saying Rava was raising a difficulty with that sugya, he wasn't raising a difficulty. He was actually just asking a question. What would be the parallel thing to say in a case of Eish? So again, just to review before we move on, we have Rabba, who said by killing a ben chorin, when there's no skila, there's no kofer. And then we had to add, but there is dam in payment. But really, let's go back to the original law. You don't pay kofer when it was done without intent. Rish Lakish said you don't pay kofer when you kill a slave without intent. And now we're getting to a third opinion here, a difference of opinion here. Kofer, matamud lomar in kofer. Just could have said kofer yushat alav. We put a ransom payment on you. Why does it say in kofer yushat alav? If you pay a ransom payment, lirabat kofer shelo b'chavana ke kofer b'kavana. He has a totally different halacha against Rabba. He says, what do you mean? If it's a ben chorin, you pay kofer even if there's no intent. That's why the word im is there. It's this extra word to say you pay kofer anyway. Amarle Abaye says, what are you talking about? Well, then you should say the same thing by Eved, because it says im Eved yigach, if the shor gores an Eved. L'rabot Eved shelo b'chavana ke Eved b'chavana. B'chite mahachinami. And if you're going to say, okay, yeah, he says the same thing by Eved, okay, and then he disagrees both with Rabba and with Rish Lakish. How can he possibly say it? Rish Lakish, didn't Rish Lakish say? Shor shemit the David shelo b'chavanah patur mishloshim shekalim. How can he go against Rish Lakish? To which they said, of course he could go against Rish Lakish. Amalek Gavra Karami. Yeah, Rish Lakish says that. Rabbi Yochanan disagrees. So we now have a three-way machlok. Rabbi Yochanan says, not you're going to shelo b'chavanah, you're going to pay kofer and you're going to pay knas. Rish Lakish says you're not going to pay it by Eved, and Rabbi says you're not going to pay it by someone who kills a ben cholim. Okay. Now, Kiata Ravin Amar Rabbi Yochanan Eved Matamud Amar Im Eved L'Rabot Eved Shelo B'Chavanah Eved B'Chavanah. Here's our proof that Rabbi Yochanan actually holds it by Eved also. So because Ravin brings the halacha that he has the exact same drasha by Eved. Now, L'Rish Lakish, who said it only by Eved, Nami Ne'ema Mi De Evedim Eved Lo Darish Kofer Im Kofer Nami Lo Darish. If he doesn't have the Eved drasha because he doesn't think you darshan it by Eved, then maybe he also doesn't think you darshan Im Kofer. To which we're going to say, Amre lo, Evedim Eved lo darish, kofer im kofer darish. Notice Rish Lakish only said his halacha by the slave, because he thinks Eved lo Eved is not, im Eved is not a drasha, but he does think kofer im kofer. And that's why we're going to have a three-way machlok. We're going to have, again, Rabbi Yochanan says both cases, killing the slave, killing a person, a ben cholin, a free person, even if you didn't intend, you actually have to pay the kofer anyway. It's not connected to the skila. Rish Lakish is going to say it only by killing a ben cholin. There's kofer. But knas, for an eved, you're not going to pay because he darshans the im by kofer to include, but not the im by eved. Now the Gemara is going to end with saying, and then we have Rabba who doesn't darshan it at all. Not in the slave, not in the, okay, he holds across the board. There's no kofer, there's no knas. Okay, that's the through machloket. But now we just have to see why would Rish Lakish make that distinction. Rabbi Yochanan and Rabba are very clear. One says, no matter what you pay kofer and knas. The other one says, no matter what you don't pay, not kofer, not knas. Rish Lakish says this in between. So why did he darshan one, not the other? And this is just going to be basically based on the words in the pasuk. Eved im eved lo ktiv bimkom tashlumin. Kofer im kofer ktiv bimkom tashlumin. In kofer yushat alav is exactly where the payment comes in. So because it's where the payment comes in, we're going to say it comes to include an additional person's going to pay, which is even if there was no intent of the shor. But im eved yigach is not in the part about the payment. The im eved comes up in the context of if the shor gores a slave, then blah, 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 blah. But that's the payment is after. The im is not about the payment. Im kofer is about the im. If you pay the ransom, then you have to pay the ransom. So this is not in the payment. And also it's needed to explain the case because it's saying not if you killed a person, but if you killed an eved, a slave, not a free person, that it's necessary. It's not a word that's meant to be darshan, basically. So therefore, he doesn't darshan that one, but he does darshan the kofer. And that's why he makes that distinction. Okay, so the two main topics for today, just to do a very brief summary, is the Isha saying the woman, the kofer payment goes to her heirs. And then we had a whole side about that whole thing, what things the husband inherits, what things he doesn't inherit. And then we got to this issue, this three-way machloket about a shor who kills without intent. From there, we got sidetracked because we had this whole question on Rabbah with the Mishnah and Ketubon, and then we had to explain that actually was talking about something else, which wasn't without intent, it was without proper witnesses and admissions and all that. But we ended up, resolving that whole contradiction. But in the end, we basically have these three approaches as to what we do with a shor that kills a person or kills a slave without intent. Do we have kofer? Do we have the knas? Or do we have nothing? Or if we don't have the kofer, right, that was the other thing, do we at least have financial compensation that we need to compensate with? And that we ended up saying, according to Rabbi, you do. You don't have the kofer, but you do have to compensate the family, which makes a lot of sense, right? Why should the family end up without any compensation? And then we have Rabbi Yochanan who thinks you do pay the kofer, you do pay the knas, and then you won't need the damim, the financial compensation, because you already have it, because you have other payment. Anyway, those are and then we have Rish Lakish, who was in between, you distinguish between an eved and killing a ben cholin, a free person. That's it for today. Wishing everyone a Shabbat Shalom and a Chanukah Sameach.